Okay, so what the hell just happened with Oklahoma? I am seeing people talk about this. It doesn't seem to be the biggest news in the world, but it's definitely getting coverage. It's something that, if you turn on the news in the morning, it'll probably, it might not be the first story, but it's probably going to be a story. Because, I mean, it's a really interesting one, and it seems very historic, but I think the reason why more people are talking about it is because we really don't know what it means yet. And so the background is that you had this kid toucher in Oklahoma who was convicted back in 1997. And apparently he's a Creek Indian, and he said to the state after when they were prosecuting him, his defense was, hey, you can't prosecute me. This is, Creek land, so I have to be tried under Creek law. And his case for that was that Congress never really dissolved or annulled the treaty which created all of the Indian lands in Oklahoma before it was a state, because originally Oklahoma was called Indian Territory. It was a place for only the Indians. And eventually, as westward expansion continued, white folks started wanting to move in there too, and so they did. But I guess the court has ruled, and I'm not enough of a legal expert to really break down and determine what the case that the way the court ruled, whether they're right or wrong. But what the court says is that those treaties are still in place, and that though that land is still ceded to the tribes. And so that's how we end up with the headline that the Supreme Court just gave away half of Oklahoma. Now, it's not even clear to me whether these count as reservations under the law or if they are actual sovereign territories. From what I understand, it seems like they're treating these as if they're reservations, normal reservations, which of course exist all across the U.S. and in Oklahoma. And what that means is that those areas, even though they're within the borders of the state of Oklahoma, are not subject to Oklahoma state law, which is what this guy was arguing. He was saying that, hey, I committed this crime. I assaulted this child on Creek land, and so therefore I can't be prosecuted under Oklahoma state law. And, the same is true if, like here in Florida, I go down to one of the reservations, like Brighton or something like that. Gambling in Florida is illegal, but if I go to one of these reservations where gambling is legal, I can go to a casino. Now, the implications of this, sort of the analysis of that seems to vary. There are people who, like Ted Cruz and others, are saying that essentially Oklahoma is canceled. There is no more Oklahoma in this part of the state, or what used to be the state. This whole half is completely separate now. It's been hard cleaved in half, and that's also what the state of Oklahoma was arguing to the Supreme Court. Now, some of the Indian attorneys I've seen, the ones who actually work for the tribes, do not say that. In fact, who was it? Was it USA Today? I think I was reading. They quoted a former, Chief Justice of I think it was the Choctaw Supreme Court, and he was saying, oh wait, no, I think it actually might have been the Creek Supreme Court. He was saying that this ruling should not affect non-Indians, and that this only has to do with, Indian defendants, because I'm not entirely sure what his rationale is, but he's saying essentially that all this says is that the state of Oklahoma can't prosecute Indians within this territory. But I don't understand why they would be able to prosecute non-Indians. Because I'm pretty sure that if I go down to Brighton and I murder somebody, I'm going to be tried in Brighton under Brighton law, not under Florida state law. I don't see how the state of Oklahoma would have the authority to prosecute anyone on Indian lands, even if they are non-Indians, because those people, I don't think would be considered Oklahoma residents, because if people living on Indian reservations were considered residents of the state, that reservation is encapsulated by, that it's surrounded by, well, then they could vote in elections. And I've never heard of Indians on reservations voting in state elections or any elections. They have their own government and they deal with that way. They might have elections for things. A lot of them don't, I think. They have their traditional tribal structures. But I don't see what he's saying in that, by implying that the state of Oklahoma could still prosecute the non-Indian people in these lands as if they're Oklahomans. Well, if they're not living in Oklahoma territory, they're not Oklahomans. And of course, the big elephant in the room here is tax revenue. People are wondering, well, would the state of Oklahoma still be entitled to the tax revenue in these lands? Well, definitely not. It's an Indian reservation. States cannot tax Indian reservations. And so this, might be a great thing for a lot of the people who live here, because maybe, the reservations are going to be a lot less, taxing than the state government. I don't know. They could be worse. Or the tribes could just keep taxes the way they are and enjoy the revenues. Either way, this story's far from over. There's a lot that still needs to happen. We have no idea really how this is going to be implemented. How much authority are the 5 tribes going to assert? Because it seems like this ruling gives them a lot of power. And for them, I think it would be very strange if they just rolled over and said, oh, okay, well, the Supreme Court says that, but we're going to cede a bunch of authority to the state of Oklahoma and keep letting the state of Oklahoma operate here as if, this isn't a reservation. I mean, it would seem to me that it would be in their best interests to try and assert as much authority as they can, try and, wrestle away a bit of independence. I mean, it's what I would do if I were in their position. And if they do so, and there's a decent-sized territory that is controlled entirely by, Indian tribal leadership in this country, I think that would have an interesting effect on our political dynamic, because typically we do not think about Indians when it comes to American politics, but if they, control a decent-sized bit of territory, what they do and the decisions they make might have a bit more of an impact on the rest of the country. They might be more noticed. And by the way, just in case there are any YouTube censors listening who don't like me using the term Indian, that's not only the legal term that's used in the Supreme Court and by the federal government and in all the laws and treaties, but it's also the term that the friggin' people being interviewed from these tribes refer themselves as. And, I don't know. Perhaps I haven't met enough Native Americans, but most of them that I've ever met have no problem with the term Indian and refer to themselves as that because, frankly, Native American or indigenous person is just kind of long and wordy. Indian is short, and people know what that means. It's like, why would a white person refer to themselves as a Caucasian? It just sounds strange. I mean, most white folks don't even know what the Caucasus Mountains are or, what connection they have to the word Caucasian. But anyway, that's beside the point. Now, beyond this case, not only are these tribes in this area going to, in my estimation, begin asserting more authority and trying to collect the tax revenue and make the laws, but you're going to see, obviously, tribes in other parts of the country sue for similar reasons and say that their treaties were violated and that their reservations are still in effect. Now, some people are looking at this and saying, oh my gosh, look at this. They're cutting up America. There's going to be none of America left. Well, I mean, those fears are somewhat justified, but they're also kind of nuts in that it's not like Native Americans are going to conquer the United States back from all of the descendants of Europeans and Africans and Asians who live here too. They're an incredibly small minority, and nobody is going to accept for any lengthy period of time being ruled over by a tribal oligarchy that is only selected by a very, very small number of, tribal citizens. So no matter what the Supreme Court says, you're not going to have, they can't just give the whole country back to the tribes and say to each of the various Indian tribes that you now control this whole territory. They can't just give all of Florida to the Seminoles and say, okay, Seminoles, here's your big swath of territory, because people just aren't going to tolerate being ruled by folks who are completely unaccountable to them. And that's something that I believe it was Sam Alito, or maybe it was Ginsburg actually, who pointed that out in the Supreme Court arguments. That are you saying that we're just going to put all of these people under the administration of bodies that are not accountable to them in any way because they're not tribal citizens? In a world where democracy is extolled as such a high virtue, that just won't be tolerated by most people, even though I personally might prefer to be ruled by the Seminoles than by my fellow Floridians. Though I don't know that for a fact, I'm just saying it's possible. Nevertheless, this is sort of the ultimate conclusion of the people who make the argument that America's bad because it was stolen, and there shouldn't be any white folks here, or black people, I guess, for that matter, and everybody needs to go. If that ideology is going to continue to permeate, well, then it's going to make rulings like this seem much more reasonable. And so we're going to get more of them. I mean, the Supreme Court might, one day quite soon rule that the United States is largely illegal. They might just cancel the whole country. Now, I don't think that in any way would be the undoing of the U.S. I think that it would be a symptom of the problem. The Supreme Court can't just snap their fingers and destroy America, but if they get to the point to where they feel that's acceptable, because remember, the Supreme Court itself is very much a product of the zeitgeist. If they get to the point to where they feel comfortable making that ruling, well then, America will have already been lost. So anyway, with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.